Let's get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today for our CCLAS and Fusion Integration webinar. My name is Dion Borg. I'm the General Manager for CCLAS, and joining me in this webinar presentation today is Natalia Valenzuela, our Geology consultant here at Datamine. Okay, let's begin. So here's the obligatory nerdy photo of me back in year 12 doing some titrations. I think in this year I got 10th best in Australia for my school titration competition. So that was my only claim to fame. But so I have got a background in chemistry, studied chemistry at university, and went on to work at Queensland Nickel, which is a nickel refinery up in North Queensland. Worked in that laboratory for about 9.5 years. And during some of that time, I was actually a CCLAS user. So I was what they call a CCLAS administrator or CCLAS super user, using CCLAS in a real world laboratory environment. So I've been working with the CCLAS product for about 13 years now. So as the general manager, I look after the sales of the product globally, implementation of the product, the support, and the R&D of our products as well. I still do travel to site and still visit our customers and still do work. So this is a photo of me visiting the team out at New Century Mine. And it's important that we are still we spend face-to-face time with our customers to understand their challenges. So if you'd like to add me on LinkedIn, Rebecca will post the link in the chat, so feel free to connect with me. Over to you, Natalia.
Thanks, Dion. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for your time. My name is Natalia, and as Dion mentioned, I'm an in-house geology consultant for our exploration suite, which includes Fusion, which is our geoscientific database management system. I also work with PA Explorer, which is our geophysical solution, and with Discover, which is our GIS mapping software. A little bit about myself. I'm a geologist by trade. You can tell by the accent that I'm not a local. I study in Mexico, my bachelor in geoscience, and then I moved to Australia to do my master at the University of Western Australia. My career in Australia started with a very exciting copper gold project, performing mainly logging, creating cross-sections, QA/QC, and data validations. I love spending time with rocks and I love data, so that was the perfect place for me. Then I moved into a gold company, doing a bit more of the same, and then moving more into more projects management tasks, like end of program reports and administrative tasks. Again, more QA/QC and data validations and working with databases. And finally, I moved into Datamine, which is where I currently am, having with Datamine for almost a year. And I think that's about it. If you would like to connect with me, please add me on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to have a chat, either if you want to pop a question about what we're presenting or just a general question about any of the topics I have been involved with. Please just reach out anytime. Now, to get it started, we are gonna first speak about what will be the disadvantage of not having a LIMS and a GDMS integration. Because most of the companies, all the places I have been working, we have a geoscientific database management system, but it's very rare that you have your in-house LIMS system. And then there's a lot of disconnection between the laboratory and your own database. So let's speak about which are these disadvantages. The first one will be that we are gonna have data silos. Again, as I mentioned, you will have your own database and the laboratory will have their own database. And the integration and the communication between this one is completely isolated, which is going to create delays on your decision making, which also increases costs because we know that time is money. Then there's a lot of lack of traceability, like especially with this environment where we have pipe workers and we have handovers. There's like what happened with these samples, have they been sent, have they been received, where are they, who has them? That happens all the time. Then we are also be facing duplicate data entry. When data is not integrated, it might need to be entered into multiple systems. And then you have to fill more than one form, and you have to fill more than one report, and you'll need to notify everybody. And that's a lot of administrative tasks, which can lead also to errors and inefficiencies. Another disadvantage will be inconsistent data formats. Even if you have a LIMS and a GDMS, if they don't communicate, you can get the data you need to get the data in the correct format for each of these systems, which again is rework and more time. Now, finally, we have lack of visibility. When data is not integrated, it can be difficult to get the complete picture. You might not be able to easily identify the ore quality, or it can also lead to loss of profit.
Okay, so just getting into the benefits of having CCLAS and Fusion integration for your company. You know, if you do have another LIMS apart from CCLAS, obviously you can integrate to Fusion, but there is actually a cost to use that Fusion API. So obviously the advantage for integrating CCLAS and Fusion, there is no cost in using that API. We cover that as part of you know, your maintenance when you have both of the products with us. Now, data is transferred between CCLAS and Fusion in real time automatically. So laboratory test results are transferred automatically to Fusion, enabling the geologist to make informed decisions more quickly. Increased collaboration. So this fosters better collaboration between laboratory personnel and geology teams with those integrated systems. And there is a cost reduction because, you know, you've got less rework due to the data discrepancies that can result, and obviously that reduces your operational costs. So we're just going to move into the demo now. It takes about 17 minutes. So both Natalia and I we'll just turn off our cameras briefly. And so at the end of the presentation, we'll turn our cameras back on and continue with the presentation. So we'll see you guys on the other side.
Okay. Today we're going to be focusing on sampling and laboratory data management. I am going to skip the logging workflow with Fusion, but if this is something you want to see, just leave it and we'll make it happen. So here I have a fresh logging sheet, and the first thing I have to do is define my sampling intervals. And for that, I'm just going to be inserting individual rows for each of my intervals. So I have my first sample, I have at my second sample, and in this case, my logging intervals are 2.5 meters long. And as you notice, Fusion is smart enough to pick the pattern of my logging length, and it's just going to give it by default. If I want to change it, I can just come here and change the number. I'm going to keep adding sampling intervals until I reach sample 15. The reason why I stopped at sample 15 is because sample 15 have a duplicate. And if I want to add a duplicate, all that I have to do is go here to the bottom and go to quality control. And it's going to open this window where I can define which is my duplicate. So my parent sample is going to be sample 15 and is suggesting a sample number for my duplicate, which this one is not correct because we this way of calling our duplicates here. And for sample type, I'm going to select duplicate and I'm going to click OK. Cool, the sample has been generated. And if I switch my table and I go to duplicates, here I will have the sample ID for my duplicate. Now I will go back to assay. And I'm going to add a standard just to show you how it works. So I'm going to go to standards at the bottom. And it's going to open this window where I can select new. And again, it's going to give me a sample number which in this case, I don't want the suggested sample ID. I'm going to just call this one 16, and it's going to be OREAS 905. And the depth is going to be 20, which is my last interval. And I can add comments if I want. I'm just gonna leave it blank in this case. Just gonna click OK, and it's also gonna give me the element that is for and the certified amount for that specific standard. So now I'm gonna close this one and go back to my sampling table, and I'm just gonna add one more sample. And if you notice, again, Fusion is knowing that sample 16 is taken, so the next sample that it adds is 17. Now that I have finished my sampling, go to add to dispatch to generate the dispatch number. And I have two options. I can add to an existing dispatch, or I can create a new one. I'm gonna select create new one. I'm gonna call this Fusion CCLAS Fusion Demo. And I'm gonna take all samples and standards in this call. I'm just gonna click OK. And I'm gonna say yes. Now, I'm not gonna spend much time on this window, but this window, all that it's doing is showing the data from your company, from your work order, from the carrier. If, for example, I go to the drop-down menu of the carrier, you can select which is the carrier for this specific sample dispatch, and Fusion would also have all the data related to that carrier. So the email, the person, the signature it requires, so you can track and contact the right person at the right moment. You can also add more details about the project, of which laboratory is going to receive it, the number of containers, the lab preparation, and etc. Special instructions if you need. Okay. Once I'm happy with this, I'm just gonna click dispatch. I'm just gonna ignore this message. It's just giving me a warning that I need to add more information about the laboratory, otherwise it's gonna affect my cost, which is okay. Once I click OK, it's gonna automatically generate my sample submittal report, which is containing all that information in a nice and pretty report, which is easy to print, give physically to the carrier, give physical to the lab if needed, and it can be signed for all the stakeholders. So again, there's no need to work with Excel, there's no need to have multiple formats, there's no need to update multiple files. You will have all the information in one centralized database. Here is where the magic happens. Once the samples have been dispatched, both and the physical samples, the samples become visible in a view on the Fusion database. CCLAS will then query this view periodically by scheduling a job via a linked SQL server. For all samples that have been dispatched in the last 30 days that do not exist in the CCLAS database already. The CCLAS job number will as a submission number from Fusion. Now, Christian will show us the CCLAS workflow, and once the results have been validated using CCLAS, they will be exported back into our Fusion database.
All right, so we see at this point in time, it's going to take a few seconds because CCLAS has got quite a bit of the information that it's processing in the background. So we'll just wait for this to finish. Once the message in the bottom left of the screen disappears, then we'll know it's done. Okay, we can just ignore this for now. This won't happen on the production system. Okay, we should almost be done. Unfortunately, our test server is not the fastest in the world, so it's taking a little bit longer than it would be on site. Okay, so I see it's done. So we'll just close this for now. We'll come back to the task scheduler later on, the ID. So let's rather go back to the data entry screen. This is an Excel grid type interface where all the data is processed. So we're just going to open a job in here. We'll select the fire assay scheme, or that's the method that they're going to use for this analysis. All right, so let's quickly wait for it to open. There we see there's all the samples that were submitted by Fusion. I'm going to use the sample ID. It will give you the borehole ID, and it will also give the description what type of sample it is. Okay, so we're going to close here for now. And then, look, once the samples have been submitted from Fusion, that doesn't mean that they are already at the laboratory. So the laboratory will now need to go and physically mark them as received. So I'm just going to, sorry, I need to reopen the screen so that it can refresh the list of jobs that is waiting to be received. So the list at the bottom, the drop down, that will contain a list of all the jobs that was submitted by Fusion, but it has not yet been received. So we see there's our submission, our job. So we're going to select it, and it will pull up all the samples that was submitted. Now there's various options of selecting these samples. You can either use the buttons on the right hand side, or we can use the text box on the top of the screen, and then they can use a barcode scanner to scan should any be affixed to the sample, or we can just select them all, and then once we hit the submit button, the system will mark them and timestamp them as received. This is also handy for the lab and the geologists to track the time differences between submission and actual receiving. So a way of figuring out possible bottlenecks in the system. All right. So now we need to create a laboratory batch. Now, the laboratory batch is just a logical grouping of these samples because the laboratory are adding their own internal QC samples to the job. So what this screen basically will do is it will take the samples and the screen will add then, based on a preset QC protocol, it will add some internal controls, QC controls, to this logical job that we are creating. So you see we are selecting the samples here, and because they've got a physical rack size of 25, that's the actual physical size of the equipment that they use to do the fire assay. So at the bottom, it's going to give you them some indicators of how many samples they can still add to this batch. So we'll select the samples, then we can hit the create button once they are happy to create this batch for us. Okay, so once we're happy, we click the create button. And then what the system will do is it will go back, you'll see the message will appear here at the bottom where it says ready now. Once we hit the button, it's telling us that it's creating a batch job for this scheme, FA30. So this also takes a few seconds because, again, it's quite a bit of information that is processed and handled in the background. So there we see it's created the batch successfully. So at this point in time, we can close our screen here. And then we're going to go back to the data entry screen. Remember, this is where all the data has been processed. You know, that's where they enter their numbers. Right, so now when we go to the batches section, so we're going to see there is our batch that we just created. We can see it from the received the date stamp. Also, at the time when they create the batch, they will receive printed report, so it's easy for them to track their batches because that report will have the number on it. So you can see here's all our samples. You will notice that there's some samples in red that has now appeared. That is the internal QC that the laboratory is adding. So you'll see there's replicates that the samples that the CCLAS adds. We've got some standards. So now we're going to enter some results. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just entering the results manually, but in practice, the AA, the instrument that reads the gold, that will be connected directly to CCLAS, and as they read the sample instrument, it will be transferred directly to CCLAS. So you're omitting this the manual data capture step. So we're going to save our results. I'm just going to close the screen now, because typically the guy will read it and you will go out of it, and then in the next morning the management staff, whether it be the supervisors or the manager, he will then come in and he will open the same batch. He will see his results here. He will have a look at the results. If there's failures, when a QC fails, the system will turn it red. So we see there's no red, so he's happy with these results. So at this point in time, he needs to approve the results. He needs to tell the system that, okay, my results are ready. So we use the approve job, a validate batch option. Now we can see that it gives us the message that it's been validated. The gray shade disappear. That's also just a visual clue to tell us that the samples have been validated. So we're going to close this. So at this point in time, the results have been deemed good by the laboratory. So now we're going to go back to our task. Again, this is sitting in the background, running at predefined time intervals. And then we've got a schedule here called export to CHD, which is our CCLAS historian database, because we don't want to keep data live for too long because it will be heavy. We typically archive off results samples after a couple of months, and then we keep recent active. So we push all the data out to an historian database. So we're just gonna run test for now, just to fire the session manually. So because again, there's our message. We just wait for it to disappear. This one doesn't normally take that long. Okay, should be almost done. We can just ignore that for now. This won't happen on the production system. Now, what it's doing now, it's pushing out our live data to the historian database, which also contains the table that I've exposed to the Fusion team. So they're going to pick up their results from here. So now, if all went well, it's over to Faith.
That's great. So I've logged into the Fusion Central DHlogger database. So I'll go to sample analysis and batch authorization. Okay, so the batch authorization has loaded. So I'm going to use the lab reference number just so that we can filter down to the we're working with. And I should, if I'm not mistaken, I should have it. Yes, I have it on the clipboard. Then we're going to retrieve that sample. As we can see, this is the sample that we exported with the dispatch number CCLAS Fusion demo. So on the import log, we've got the same information that we essentially had on the data lab import summary. We've got the standard results. Then we also have got the duplicate results, if there are any. and all the imported results are here. And this is the thing that they also use for batch authorization.
Okay, so just to recap on the steps that we have seen on the video, from Fusion to CCLAS, the first steps are we log the samples, as you will do it in any standard operation. You define your intervals, and then you insert your duplicates and your standards. As we have seen, Fusion will know which are your standards, which ones are active, which ones are inactive, and it also will have on the background, which is the certified value and the maximum and minimum acceptable value. So when you perform your QA/QC, it can tell you, hey, this is out of range, which makes the QA/QC process much more easy. Finally, once you're happy with your sample intervals and your QA/QC, you will send your samples for the sample dispatch. The sample dispatch serves as a request that is sent to the laboratory, instructing in what to analyze. And for example, you can define your lab package, and as we have seen, you can also define special instructions. All the available samples will display once you are selecting the samples for the sample dispatch. So it's also a good reminder, like if you have any samples in your database that haven't been sent by any reason. When all the information is entered and it has been sent, the status of that sample dispatch generate will change to dispatched. So you can also easily track which ones had been dispatched and which ones had been received. And I will pass it to CCLAS.
Yeah, so as Christian demonstrated in the video, CCLAS automatically imports those samples from Fusion through our application called Taskman. And as Christian mentioned, we were showing you running this manually, but that runs in the laboratory all of the time. And so, users do not have to interact with CCLAS. CCLAS will automatically import those samples and register them in CCLAS. So as Christian mentioned, that once the samples are physically received into the laboratory, we then need to verify we've received all the samples, so you can validate all that, check all the samples are actually there. So use our sample receipt application, and then generally the samples are stored waiting to be prepared. So generally you would dry the samples, grind the samples up, and then split them to put them into sample packets. Once you've done that, then you look at all of your samples that you've got to analyze in the lab, and you batch them together. So lab batching is batching the same type of samples from different jobs together, so you get a better throughput on your instruments. Once you've batched all your samples, then you go and start weighing all those samples up, digesting those samples on the hot plate to be prepared to run onto an instrument like an AAS, as Christian mentioned, analyzing gold in that example. So the instrument analyzes those samples, creates an export file. CCLAS automatically retrieve those results into CCLAS. The user doesn't have to do any interaction, and then they look at the results in manual data entry. So that Excel screen, that style screen that Christian showed you, samples top to bottom and lights left to right. They'll then do any calculations that are required, check the QC, and as Chris said, if there's any failures, it won't actually allow you to validate the samples. So once all the QC is passed, the samples are then validated by the appropriate person in the laboratory. And then again, once that's happened, Taskman in the background recognizes those samples are validated, then exports all of that sample data through to Fusion.
Okay. That export and the communication between CCLAS and Fusion will happen on the background thanks to our API. You don't need to worry about what is happening, but essentially CCLAS is paying a table and Fusion is automatically gathering that information from that table on the background with SQL. So Fusion will know, because it has been triggered by CCLAS, that it has samples sitting there that need to be authorized, which have been received by the lab. And once you open DHLogger, which is a login model, and when you perform all your QA/QC and imports, you will have that sample dispatch pending for approval. You will go, as we have seen in the video, you will see your QA/QC charts, which can easily tell you if you're within the ranges, expected ranges. And if you're happy with everything, if your data seems okay, you will just accept it and it will go into your database. Information, or in this case, assays, won't go into your what we call the central database until you go and accept it. And because Fusion works with profiles, only the what we call the qualified person will be able to accept. So it gives you a lot of control on who admit, accept, pass your samples, but it's also a very smooth and standardized workflow. Now, moving into our last slide, the question here is, how can Fusion and CCLAS and the integration between these two can add value to your mine site? As we have seen, we can enhance the data accuracy. When CCLAS and Fusion are integrated, the data can be easily shared between the two systems, which is going to help improve the accuracy and the data entry and the reporting. We haven't seen this today, but if it's something you're interested, let me know. Fusion has a model called Report Manager, and all the information from your drill hole data and from your lab can be easily reported. Now, you can improve decision making by having these two integrated systems. The communication is going to be automatic, so you can make decisions much more quicker. Now, you're going to reduce the risk. The less manual handling we have, the easier it is to manage the risk and reduce it. For example, you can use data from CCLAS to ensure that samples are properly labeled, so there are no sample mix-ups, which happen very often, and that they can perform QA/QC checks both within CCLAS and internally with Fusion.
Okay, so if you would like to find out how to integrate CCLAS and Fusion for your mine site, please contact us today via our contact form on our website, and take that next step towards real-time interoperability at your site. So we'll pop that link into the chat. So please go ahead and click on that should you want to talk to us further and have a free consultation on our integration between CCLAS and Fusion.